For exactly 43 seconds, he ran completely blind. He didn't look back. He couldn't see a single one of his opponents. He was exiled to the worst starting position in Olympic history. And yet, running entirely alone, he shattered a 17-year-old world record that even Usain Bolt thought was physically untouchable. To understand how impossible this is, you have to understand the brutal geography of the 400-meter race. Welcome to Lane 8. In the track world, it is known as the graveyard. Because the track is an oval, the starting blocks are staggered. The man in Lane 8 starts far ahead of the pack. You cannot see who is behind you. You cannot pace yourself off the other runners. You are being hunted by a pack of the fastest men on Earth, and you cannot even see them coming. The coaches, the experts, and the math all say the exact same thing. You do not win Olympic gold from Lane 8. When Wayde van Niekerk stepped into that graveyard lane in Rio 2016, the broadcast cameras barely even looked at him. The entire world was focused on the middle lanes, the reigning giants of the sport, Karani James and LaShawn Merritt. They were the main characters. They had the Olympic medals and the media hype. Wayde was the outcast, pushed to the absolute edge of the track where nobody expected him to survive. He was just supposed to be background noise, but he was about to prove that the entire system was completely broken, because what Wayde did when that gun went off is the greatest anomaly in the history of human speed. August 14, 2016, the Olympic Stadium in Rio de Janeiro. To truly grasp the miracle of what happened in Lane 8, you first have to look at the center of the track. The middle lanes are where the kings live. It is where the cameras point. And on this specific night, the middle lanes were occupied by two absolute titans of the sport. In Lane 5 stood Karani James, the reigning Olympic gold medalist from Grenada, a man whose stride was so flawless he made a 400-meter sprint look like a casual jog. Right next to him, in Lane 6, was LaShawn Merritt, the American powerhouse, a former Olympic gold medalist and world champion who ran with pure, violent aggression. These two men had spent the last 5 years trading world titles back and forth. This race was supposed to be their ultimate showdown, the epic climax between two legends, but hanging over both of them and the entire stadium was a ghost. The world record for the 400-meter sprint was 43.18 seconds. Set by the legendary Michael Johnson all the way back in 1999. For 17 years, that number stood entirely untouched. Sports scientists and biomechanics experts openly debated if 43.18 was the absolute physical limit of the human body. Even Karani James and LaShawn Merritt, at the absolute peak of their careers, had never come close to breaking it. Then there was Wayde. Wayde van Niekerk was a brilliant runner, but after a brutal and exhausting semi-final the day before, he barely scraped into the final round. Because his semi-final time was slow, the Olympic seeding system punished him. They banished him to Lane 8, the outer rim, the mathematical dead zone. Before the gun even fired, the system had already written him out of the story. When the runners drop into their blocks, a heavy, suffocating silence falls over the Olympic Stadium. This is the moment where races are won or lost in the mind before the body even moves. In the middle lanes, James and Merritt are acutely aware of each other. They can see each other's twitch, hear each other's breathing. They are locked into a psychological war. But out in Lane 8, Wayde van Niekerk is staring at nothing but an empty red track. He has no visual cues. He has no physical targets to chase. When the starting gun violently cracks through the stadium, the explosion of power is immediate. For the first 200 meters, the broadcast narrative goes exactly as everyone predicted. James and Merritt explode out of the blocks, instantly eating up the stagger. The cameras follow their every move. They are running a blistering pace, practically shoulder to shoulder, pushing each other to the absolute brink of human endurance. If you were watching the center of the screen, you would think you were witnessing the greatest two-man battle in Olympic history. But if you look away from the titans in the middle and focus your eyes on the extreme outer edge of the track, something deeply unsettling is happening. Wayde van Niekerk isn't just surviving the graveyard lane. He is running at a pace that should be causing his muscles to flood with lactic acid. In a 400-meter sprint, athletes are taught to conserve energy for the final stretch. You do not sprint the first 200 meters at top speed because your body will inevitably shut down. But Wayde isn't holding back. Running completely blind, terrified of the invisible monsters hunting him from behind, he's making a fatal mistake. He's running entirely too fast. As the runners hit the 300-meter mark, the brutal biological reality of the 400-meter sprint begins to set in. This specific moment on the track is known as hitting the wall. Your lungs burn, your vision blurs, and lactic acid floods your legs so violently that it feels like you are running underwater. This is the exact point where pacing becomes everything. If you burn too much energy in the first half of the race, your body simply shuts off. You don't just slow down, you physically break down. Coming around the final curve, the stagger of the track finally unwinds. For the first time in the entire 43 seconds, the athletes are lined up on an even plane. The blindfold comes off. Karani James and LaShawn Merritt prepare to unleash their final devastating kick. They look down the final straight away, expecting to see open track ahead of them, ready to battle each other for the gold medal. But they don't see open track. They see Wayde van Niekerk, and he is not fading. He is not shutting down. Despite running the first 300 meters at a suicidal, panicked pace, Wayde is actually accelerating, because the amount of lactic acid in Wayde's body right now should physically paralyze him. In the middle lanes, the horrifying realization hits the giants. You can physically see the panic set into LaShawn Merritt's form. He's driving his arms, digging his spikes into the track with everything he has, desperately trying to close the gap. But the gap isn't closing, it is widening. Wayde van Niekerk, exiled out in the graveyard lane, running a race he was mathematically supposed to lose, is pulling away from the greatest 400-meter runners of a generation. He is tapping into a gear that simply should not exist at this stage of a sprint. With 50 meters to go, the race is over. It is no longer a competition. It is a complete massacre. Wayde van Niekerk is entirely alone on the screen. The reigning Olympic and world champions, the men the entire broadcast was built around, are so far behind him they barely even fit in the same camera frame. He is completely defying the biological limits of the human body, running with a fluid, unbroken form, while the giants behind him are physically crumbling. He crosses the finish line. He doesn't dive. He doesn't beat his chest. He just runs straight through the tape and looks up at the screen, almost confused by his own speed. Then, the digital clock flashes. 3-3. The stadium completely erupts, but for a few seconds, people cannot even comprehend the math. Michael Johnson's 17-year-old world record, the ultimate ceiling of human endurance, was 43.18. Wayde didn't just edge it out by a fraction of a hair. He completely obliterated it. He knocked off a massive 0.15 seconds. And he did it from lane 8, running entirely blind. To understand exactly how shocking this number is, you only have to look at the reaction of one specific man in the stadium. Up in the stands, watching the race, was Usain Bolt, the most dominant sprinter to ever walk the earth, the man who holds the most untouchable records in history. When the camera cuts to Bolt, he has his hands grabbed around his head, his mouth wide open in absolute, genuine disbelief. He actually abandons his interview, runs down to the track, and searches the stadium just to find Wayde. When the fastest man in the history of the universe is physically stunned by your speed, you know you haven't just won a race. You have broken the entire sport. But the mystery doesn't end at the finish line. Because the real question scientists immediately started asking was, how? How does a man run completely blind, pace himself entirely on instinct, and shatter a biological ceiling that stood for 17 years? They expected to find $1 million sports science laboratory. They assumed he was backed by an army of corporate biomechanists, advanced algorithms, and the most expensive athletic technology money could buy. That is how the American and European giants trained. That is how the system dictates you build an Olympic champion. But Wayde didn't have a corporate megalab. The mastermind behind the greatest sprint in human history was a 74-year-old great-grandmother. Her name is Ans Botha. In South Africa, they affectionately call her Tanny Ons. She had been coaching track for over 5 decades. While the rest of the sprinting world was obsessing over advanced data analytics and hyper-specific wind resistance gear, this white-haired great-grandmother was quietly building an absolute monster on a modest university track in Bloemfontein. She didn't rely on computers to tell her when Wayde was ready. She relied on a half-century of raw experience watching the human body move. Ons Botha knew that Wayde had the natural speed, but to break Michael Johnson's legendary record, raw speed wasn't enough. She had to build him into a psychological fortress. She rigorously conditioned his body to withstand the exact moment the lactic acid hit, training him to completely ignore the extreme pain signals his brain was sending him. She didn't just teach him how to run, she taught him how to survive the darkest, most painful phase of the 400-meter sprint without his mechanics falling. apart. But the absolute physical cost of running 400 meters in 43:03 seconds is almost impossible for a normal person to comprehend. When the race ended and the adrenaline finally started to wear off, the brutal reality of what Wayde had just done to his own body immediately set in. He didn't casually walk off the track to celebrate with the global media or take a victory lap. He collapsed. He had pushed his biological limits so far past the red line that his body began to shut down. He had to be physically supported and immediately given medical attention. His muscles were severely starved of oxygen, and he was violently sick. This wasn't just a foot race anymore. It was a display of near-lethal physical exertion. He had literally run his body to the absolute brink of system failure just to shave 0.15 seconds off human history. And that is the terrifying, unspoken truth about the 400-meter sprint. To become a legend, you have to be willing to torture yourself on a level that most human beings simply cannot endure. Karani James and LaShawn Merritt, the two absolute giants who were supposed to own this Olympic final, actually ran incredible times that night. In almost any other Olympics in history, their performances would have easily secured a gold medal, but they had the catastrophic misfortune of running in the exact same race where a man exiled to lane 8 decided to break the laws of physics. Global track and field community was completely paralyzed. For 17 years, Michael Johnson's record was treated like a sacred artifact. It was the absolute benchmark of human greatness. And suddenly, a quiet runner from South Africa, coached by a 74-year-old great-grandmother, running completely blind in the graveyard lane, had just turned that legendary record to dust. But this impossible performance leaves the sporting world with one haunting question, a question that biomechanists and track experts are still fiercely debating today.